Welcome to the Church and Culture Podcast, a weekly discussion with Dr. James Emery White on the latest trends happening in culture and where and how the church should respond. Jim is the founding and senior pastor of Mecklenburg Community Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, president of Serious Times, a ministry devoted to exploring the intersection of faith and culture, former professor of theology and culture at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where he also served as their fourth president, and the author of more than 20 books. I am your host, Alexis Dry, and I can't wait to dive into this week's conversation. Well, thank you for joining us this week, and welcome again to the Church and Culture Podcast and today's conversation. For those of you who were introduced maybe directly to this podcast, you may not know that the podcast is actually just one arm of the Church and Culture ministry. So in addition to this weekly conversation, the Church and Culture team also manages an incredibly helpful resource, which features twice weekly blogs written by Dr. White, past message series given at Mecklenburg Community Church, course curriculum, daily headline news, and a handful of other things. And in addition to that, the Church and Culture team hosts a series of ministry workshops every spring, and then an all-day live stream conference each fall. And that fall conference is actually right around the corner. It's scheduled for Thursday, September 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And in the years that we've been running the podcast, we actually haven't ever talked about the conference. So I was hoping that we could do that today. So Jim, can you start us off by giving a bit of background as to why the Church and Culture Conference started and maybe who it's for?
Well, heaven knows the Christian world does not need another conference. I mean, that's at least one that is just like every other conference. You know the drill, the same 8 or 10 speakers on the circuit, no matter which conference it is, that are currently hot right then at that moment. The same talks that are all not so thinly veiled book promotions that basically are buy me, buy me, buy me. And the same kind of pep rally atmosphere. And if I sound a little cynical, I'm sorry. But I've reached that age where you don't try to sugarcoat it, I think. They serve a purpose. Don't get me wrong. They serve a purpose. But we had them in ready supply. And there were lots of them. And there wasn't just a need for another large church to churn out another one, I didn't feel. In its earlier years, MEC did offer what I thought was a really good niche conference. It was called the New Work Conference, and it was for church planters. And at the time, there was nothing else like it. We stopped after a while because the beauty of that conference was, hey, come have a conference, 3-day thing. But, you could actually see how we set up in a school or how we set up in a hotel, or you could see how we were using pipe and drape to turn a classroom or a movie theater or whatever it was at the time into a space for children. And it really had a lot of value for church planters. And but after a while, we had grown distant from our own church planting days, and the church planting world was changing very, very rapidly. A lot of the principles I taught, I think, still stand the test of time. But when I planted, there wasn't even an internet to take advantage of. So you didn't even have those kinds of marketing tools that you had. So anyway, there were simply churches better positioned for the role of leading a conference for church planters. Although I still love talking to church planters about the basic things that I think are timeless. Anyway, but it was rich while it lasted because it really did feel, like I said, a niche. But I waited personally until I felt there was another real need, something that made sense to me that I didn't see being done. And that eventually did present itself. There are conferences that bring the latest insights into leadership. There are some conferences that bring the latest insights into church growth and various other things. But where's the conference that brings the latest insights into culture? And when we started it, there wasn't any. And not just cultural insight, because there are some conferences that say, here's a smattering of exposures to various things related to culture. But in terms of practical applications for the local church in light of those insights, because I'm a church guy. I mean, and everything I want to say and do is to try to serve the local church. And so it wasn't just here's church, but here's church and culture. And here's how what we're learning about in culture, what's happening in culture, here's how it plays out in the church and how the church can respond and what the church can do. If our mission is the evangelization and the transformation of culture through the centrality of the local church, then 2 things follow. We have to understand the times, but then we have to also know, as churches, what to do. We have to understand the culture and how best to respond to it, penetrate it, reach it, transform it. And we got to understand how to do that, as I said, through the local church. It is not that other means don't exist for the mission, but Jesus created and charged the church to be in the vanguard. So the vision for the annual Church and Culture Conference has been simple. Every year to bring the latest, best insights about culture to the surface and then to explore how to practically respond as a church, being mindful of those insights. If there's a theme verse, it's that verse in Chronicles about the men of Issachar, which says that they understood the signs of the times and knew what Israel should do. That twin combination, signs of the times and knowing what Israel should do, knowing what's happening in our world and knowing what the church should do is what the conference tries to do on an annual basis. And so I'm very passionate about it, and I feel like it serves not just pastors, but church leaders and people who are involved in church, thoughtful Christians, just people, parents. Parents love this conference because we almost always have something that's germane to what's happening in that world. So yeah, that's a bit about what that's about.
Well, so this year's fall conference is going to contain 6 sessions. And the first one is all about that religious landscape study that was released by the Pew Research Center. And we did actually talk briefly about that on an earlier episode. But what prompted you to make it the topic of one of your sessions?
I didn't like how it was being covered. And that sounded a little arrogant, and I don't mean it to sound arrogant, like I know more than everybody else. So what I mean is that most of the stories about it were not done by they weren't written by pastors or people who were cultural observers or anything like that. They were just written as media stories, and so they went for kind of a headline. So I think in that sense, I'm okay to critique it because I don't think that it was engaged by the people who the Church and Culture Conference is for and what they're trying to learn about. Let me back up, having said that, blurting that out. The Religious Landscape Survey, RLS, was conducted over the course of 2 years. It was conducted in 2023 and 2024. The RLS is so large and so sweeping that it is only the 3rd time it's ever been conducted. The last time was in 2014, and the first one was back in 2007. So again, this is only the 3rd time that this sweeping large study has ever been done, and for good reason. It's a huge study, which is why it's so valuable. It surveys over 35,000 Americans in every state concerning their religious affiliations, their beliefs, their practices, and along with their social and political views and their demographic characteristics. I mean, it gets at data of such a sweeping nature. Not even the annual governmental census does this. It is simply the largest and most significant study of its kind. I read that one political scientist at the University of Notre Dame said, when asked about it, the New York Times asked him about it, and he said, "It is difficult to overstate the importance of this survey to the understanding of American religion." And he was right. And there were 2 significant headlines from the survey's findings, with the first of those getting all the press, quite frankly. The second headline did not, much less how it spoke into and informed the first headline. So that first session is going to be taking a deep dive into those findings and what the latest RLS really tells us. And it's so important to know what it really tells us. And as a result, how it really challenges us, or should. So I'm very excited about getting into it and kind of unveiling some things that I think that were largely missed by the media, but are critical of importance.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, another session focuses on what has changed in the 5 years since the pandemic. The title, though, I thought was intriguing. It's Our New World That No One Wants to Talk About. What can you tell us about that one without giving too much away?
I really felt, there's some things where, you know what you're going to say or what you want to say, what you're going to be getting into, but you just realize if I tell people what it's about, they're just not going to want to be, they're going to just hear that title and go, no, I'm not interested in that. And I feel like I almost have to make a case for it because I thought, man, if you just give me 5 minutes, you'll be hooked and we'll be off to the races and we'll be having a good time. As you mentioned, this year marked a significant milestone. It's been 5 years since the worldwide pandemic began. We now know, in ways that we didn't at the time, how it has changed our world. Not many people want to talk about how, or more to the point, they seem unwilling to accept that certain changes are here to stay. Or you just talk about anything COVID, and they just go, they just shut down. I don't want to talk about that. I'm done with that. That's over, But as the New York Times put it, and why, by the way, I had such a hard time initially trying to make a case for my last book, The Hybrid Church, because it's like, COVID, that's old, hybrid. We know. It's like, I'm not even talking about COVID. This is about the new world based on technology and just, and what churches have to do. This is a book that's way beyond that. But anyway, the New York Times put it, I thought, really well. They said, we're just living in the branch of history that the pandemic created. It's just a fact. We're living in the branch of history that created, and it continues, and its contours are only now coming into view. I mean, we're just now seeing what it is that this branch of history that was created was. So let me just give you one example of what I mean by of like what will one of the marks, hyper individualism. When the pandemic first broke, it brought us together. Some even called the solidarity breathtaking. But what actually happened is we did things in the name of the greater good, such as quarantining and social distancing. We kind of ended interpersonal activity. Some people have said that there is no such thing as society, just individuals and families. But it's as if we were reduced to two things. We were reduced to our immediate family units and the world of our phones, televisions, and computers. We became isolated. From that, we began to see others as threats, and then later we saw them as objects. And then from that isolation, we formed different interpretations of our shared experiences. It's been said that you can't argue with someone's experience, but you can argue with their interpretation of their experience. And that's what we did with an absolute vengeance. So you had one person who would see overflowing morgues. You would have another see lies and deceit. So both looking at the same picture. From this came a hyper individualism that really took hold. There was an article looking back on this on the last 5 years that kind of prompted this in my thinking, along with several others, in the New York Times, which described it as how soon we began to worry less about how our actions affected others and more about how theirs affected us. There was a sense of interdependence that gave way to animus and atomization and entitlement. Whatever empathy we had stretched out before just kind of snapped back like a tight rubber band. That's just one example of the change that the pandemic brought. And that hyper-individualism is still with us today, but manifesting itself in a host of different ways, which we'll talk about. But then there was Pew's research that came out, also looking back on the last 5 years, saying, okay, so what did COVID's done and gone, fine. But what did it do that is lasting, that if we're not aware of, we're fools, quite frankly. And Pew found other major societal changes that COVID brought our way that are still with us and look to be here to stay. Among other things, that we know, growing divide between partisans, a decreasing trust in many institutions, a massive splintering of the information environment. So as much as we all hate to revisit 2020, we have to see how 2020 was a hinge moment that shaped the world we live in today. So in this session, we're going to look at the most significant changes that the pandemic made to our world, along with the significance of each change for the life of the church. And some of the things that we're going to be talking about, people may say, I'd never even thought about that being related to that, or that change being here to stay. But I mean, if the church doesn't look at this, if people don't look at this, we won't even understand what's going on in our world. Like, we all see what's going on in our world, but we don't realize what's behind this. If we understand what's behind it, then you can start to address it and respond to it. So I think this is actually going to be a very important session, which is why I said we don't want to talk about it. But it's like, it's kind of like we need to talk about it. It's the elephant in the room.
Well, something that I'm particularly looking forward to about this year's conference is are the interviews that you're going to be featuring. And you've got a handful of prominent Christian authors in the lineup. You've got Christian Smith and Stephen Presley and John Hendricks. Why did you decide to bring them in for this conference?
Well, I mean, people are sick of hearing my voice, so I've always wanted to have the Church and Culture Conference broadened out to include a lot of different voices, and this just seemed to be a really fun way to do it, and one that fit our online presentation of the conference as it switched to several years ago. I mentioned how I mentioned how a lot of Christian conference feature primary sessions that are little more than, a talk built to hype the sale of a book. Kind of like the whole talk is, let me tell you 3 points, and the 3 points are why you should buy my book. And okay. And again, I'm not trying to be snarky, but there is often little content, and it is often a sales pitch. But the fact of the matter is, the book itself may have actually been worth a session. Stop the sales pitch, talk about the book, talk about what's in the book. Okay, I might buy it, I might not buy it, but tell me about the salient ideas. So I began to kind of play with that and thought, well, what if you could go a step beyond that? What if you could actually have the contents of an important book be a session but not where you say to an author, "Hey, try to distill it in 30 minutes," or where or anything like that. But just say, okay, what if somebody interviewed them, somebody who actually read the book and saw its importance and interviewed them about it in a way that introduces the book to people, because unashamedly, we're picking books that we think that people should read, but also truly introduces its ideas. And then here's the author interact with it, and here's somebody talking to them, forcing them to interact with it even more, and just having a real engagement with the author in the book in a way that takes us to school. So I went back to, every year, one of my blogs is summer reading list, suggested summer reading list. I picked 10 books. And I went back to that list for 2025, and I knew instantly which 3 I wanted to go after. And they were all 3 very generous and said yes, and agreed to be interviewed by me. I conduct the interview, and so I invited these 3 authors who wrote books, and so it's just so easy to pick the ones that I thought were terribly, terribly important, and who I would like to engage with. I thought, who do I want to have a conversation with? I read the book. I want to talk to this guy or this gal. I want to dig a little bit deeper into this, and I've got some questions for them if they're game. So I came up with that short list. They all graciously accepted, and as you mentioned, they include Christian Smith, who is no stranger to readers of the blogs and podcasts flowing from the Church and Culture team. He's one of the leading sociologists of our day. His research and writing has just set the standard for understanding so many critical dynamics of culture. Some have called his latest book his tour de force. I personally, having read many of his books, would agree. While The Rise of the Nuns is now commonly understood, what Smith does in his most recent book, and he just titles it "Why Religion Went Obsolete: The Demise of Traditional Faith in America." What he does is he goes after why. Why has this happened? And he draws from an extensive survey data and hundreds of interviews. I mean, his research is impeccable. And he offers, I think, the best analysis to date of why so many Americans have lost their faith in traditional religion. And so we'll be having a conversation with him and interviewing him. And, he's at, professor at University of Notre Dame, and just a delightful person. And just an insightful thinker. Another person that we'll be talking to is Dr. Stephen Presley. Church historian, and also heads up a lot of cultural policy center. He believes, many do as well, that there are parallels between our post-Christian world and the pagan culture of the early church that was so hostile to Christianity in the first few centuries of its attempt to grow. But what's fascinating is that while there's parallels between that pagan world and our post-Christian world, in our post-Christian world, the church is struggling. In the pagan world of that day, of which there were parallels, the early church exploded and did really well. Around AD 100, there were around 7,500 followers of Jesus. By AD 310, there were over 30 million. Presley wrote a very critically acclaimed book titled Cultural Sanctification. And the subtitle was Engaging the World Like the Early Church. And so in that session, I'll be talking with Dr. Presley about the 5 areas that he suggests that we can learn from those first Christians, from their sense of identity and citizenship, and their intellectual life and public life, and so much more, and the roadmaps that they offer for our day. So that will be a fun journey. And we'll find that they didn't have a fight or flight mentality, but instead they chose to sanctify culture, and in ways that are still possible for the church today. So we'll explore that. And then the delight and fun of talking to John Hendricks. I told him in leading up to that interview, I said, here's one of the highest compliments I can give anybody. When I got done with your book, I was sad because I didn't want it to be over. I wanted to keep reading it. I just didn't want it to end. It was just such a wonderful book. It's on the friendship of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And few individuals have shaped the mind of contemporary Christians more than C.S. Lewis. His good friend J.R.R. Tolkien did his fair share of cultural formation as well. John heads up the Masters of Fine Arts program at Washington University in St. Louis, and he wrote an exceptionally well-informed and researched book that he creatively presented as a graphic novel. He's a New York Times best-selling author, but the books he writes combine his writing skills and his illustration skills, and it's fascinating the way he does it. And he called the book The Myth Makers, The Remarkable Fellowship of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And explores their personal biographies and their friendship, their creativity, their thinking, their motivation, and of course their faith. And it has become, when I talk to anybody who is a fan of Lewis or Tolkien and they're looking for a good book, either they want to be introduced to their lives or they're very advanced in their knowledge and they're looking for something, this is just my go-to book to recommend now. It's that good. So we'll have a fun conversation with him. And we'll talk about the key revelations, insights, the ongoing importance of their lives. Like, why are we still talking about these people that were born both in the 1890s, for goodness sake? And the great ideas, particularly of the myth that came true, that was really Lewis's and Tolkien's shared project, wanting to talk about the myth that came true. So anyway, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk to those three authors and get into their ideas.
Yeah, I can't wait. That sounds great. Well, the final session shines a spotlight on Generation Alpha, the oldest of whom is about 14 years old right now. So what do you hope for conference attendees to gain from that session?
Oh, I hope every parent who has a kid 14 or under will dial into at least that one. I think for them, that'll be worth the investment itself. And, because right now, Generation Alpha is basically 14 and younger. The oldest is 14 and the youngest Alpha was born at the very end of 24, the beginning of 25, somewhere in there. So really, we're talking about every child under the age of 14. Let me back up, though. The three big generational groups that most people are familiar with are baby boomers and followed by baby busters, sometimes called Generation X, followed by millennials, sometimes called Generation Y. The newest cohort receiving attention has been Generation Z, born between 1995 and 2010. My own book that I wrote called Meet Generation Z was designed to introduce their distinguishing marks, currently the largest of the generations, and how they can be reached for Christ. But it's really time. It's time to start talking about the generation that follows Generation Z. I held off for a while, because there's a danger in studying a generation too soon, at least in terms of trying to draw conclusions. But it's time to start looking at them and looking at certainly the world in which they were born. Generation Alpha are those born beginning in 2010, which was the same year that Apple debuted the iPad, which has more significance symbolically than you might think. The oldest, as I mentioned, is around 14. They are called Generation Alpha, as in Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. They're called the Alpha, the beginning, because they will be the first generation raised in a new world of technological integration. No other generation will be raised in the world that they will be raised in. And also because of some wanting to just start over with the alphabet. We had Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, so what are we going to do now? So Generation A. But they are the tech-savvy young children of millennials. That's who they are. And they are large. Mark McCrindle, a social researcher in Australia, who coined the phrase Generation Alpha, and it stuck, estimated that more than 2.5 million of them are born every week. He also sets 2025, this year, as the last year Alphas will be born, the kind of the ending of what we'll call that generational cohort. By its end, he says there'll be more than 2 billion in this generation. That will be slightly larger even than Generation Z, which will reach 1.8 billion globally at its peak. So they are on course to be the largest generation in the history of the world. They will shape the social media landscape. They will become the popular cultural influencers and, of course, be emerging consumers. They're already moving into the work. They will soon be moving into the workforce and into young adulthood. So it's time to get to know them. And really, this is the time for parents to start knowing, how best to engage them in light of the world in which they are a part of. One of the best definitions of culture I know that I've used for many years is that culture is the world into which you were born, and that was born into you. And so we can look at Generation Alpha through that lens, and we'll walk through some of what has shaped them, what sets them apart from earlier generations. And we'll look at some parenting insights, three things to know as parents about how to kind of navigate the waters, particularly as they age. So, yeah, I think that'll be a really important session.
Yeah, I've got 4 kids in that generation, so I'll be dialed in for sure. Now, I imagine there are probably a handful of our listeners who are intrigued by the topics that you mentioned, but maybe can't attend the conference at the time it's scheduled just for scheduling reasons. Is there another way that they can access that content?
That's another thing too that we've done very different with this conference, and particularly over the last few years, is that we're really after making this as accessible as possible. So it's now an entirely online streaming event. And we set it up too so that every registrant can view the sessions at any time, live or later, online and on demand, up to 6 weeks following the conference itself. So you don't even have to be a part of the conference day at all. And we know that we have so many international folks that want to join and be a part of this that the time zone problem itself is problematic. So if you register for this prior to the conference, that's the only catch. You have to register and prior to the start of it. But once you do, you'll get a special online code. I mean, dial in for as much of it live as you want throughout that day, that 6 hour period, but it's available to you for 6 weeks, completely online and on demand. That way, if you're not able to log in for that day, there are no worries. But it won't be available in any other form, or to those who weren't registered following the event. That's the one thing that we kind of locked down on. So I hope we've removed any and all restrictions to accessing the content. And of course, the cost of the event is priced as low as possible to ensure that cost isn't a barrier. I think people will be pretty shocked at the cost. And it's basically just so that we can keep the Church and Culture website and its resources up and going. Really, it's just almost trying to make the whole ministry enterprise cost recovery. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again to show how clear that is. Any pastor that wants to attend but honestly can't afford the registration fee, write us. We'll work something out. This isn't about money. We only charge what we do to keep the website and resources flowing. It's all about trying to serve the church. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, if you're interested in learning more or registering, the way that you're going to do that is by going to the Church and Culture website, which is churchandculture.org. And again, if you know of anybody who you think would benefit from this, please spread the word as well. As someone who works in ministry, but also is a parent and just a Christian who wants to engage the world thoughtfully, I would say from the years that I've attended this conference, I've never regretted it because it's served me on multiple levels, not only within a ministry setting, but also just how to engage my neighbors and my coworkers and my family and the things that we're all, I guess, the water that we're all swimming in every day of our lives, but how to do that from a Christian worldview. So I think you'll find it of tremendous value. And again, because you have so much time to watch it, hopefully that format will serve you. I know that I like to just listen to a session, maybe one a week or one every couple of days, and really dig deeper in it and make sure that I can go back and re-listen to something that I might have missed. So I really appreciate that format. So again, if that sounds like you, I really hope that you'll take advantage of it, and we'll catch you then. So thank you, Jim, for going through this, and we'll catch you guys next week.